The wind carried dust across Miller's Bend before it carried anything else. It curled through the fence posts, rattled the tin sign above the general store, and pushed at the hem of a woman's black skirt as she swept her porch for the third time that morning. She didn't need to sweep. The porch was clean. But her hands needed something to do, and sweeping was easier than sitting still. Her name was Nora Calloway, no, Nora Hail. She'd been Hail for 19 years now, ever since she married Thomas Hail in the little clapboard church at the edge of town. Thomas had been dead 3 winters. She still wore his ring, though she'd stopped wearing black for him a year ago. Today she wore black for a different reason. Today was the day the mail wagon came. She set the broom against the rail and looked down the road, the way she looked down that road every second Tuesday, out of habit more than hope. Ben Carter's wagon always kicked up its own private storm, and today was no different, a brown cloud rolling toward town, the mules straining. Ben slouched on the bench with his hat pulled low. Nora went inside before he arrived. She always did. She didn't need to watch him sort the bundles on the counter of the store below her rooms. She'd go down when he was gone, the way she always did, and Sarah at the counter would hand her whatever came for the Hale household. Usually nothing. Sometimes a seed catalog. Once, 3 years ago, a letter from her sister in Abilene announcing a new grandbaby. She was halfway down the stairs when she heard Sarah call her name, and something in the woman's voice made Nora stop with her hand on the rail. Nora. You'd best come see this. Sarah Beckett had run the general store's counter for 11 years, and in that time she had developed a face for bad news and a face for strange news, and Nora could tell from the doorway which face she was wearing now. It was the strange one. On the counter sat a canvas mail sack, slit open, its contents spilling out like something long buried finally reaching air. Ben Carter stood beside it, turning his hat in his hands, looking like a man who wished he'd taken a different road that morning. Railroad found it, he said, before Nora had even asked. Down in Cheyenne. Old mail car got shunted onto a siding back in '69, forgot about, sat there 20 years fillin' up with dust. They's just now clearin' it out to scrap the car. Postal office is sendin' the letters on to wherever they can still find an address that matches. Nora looked at the sack. Yellowed envelopes, their edges soft as cloth, the ink on some so faded it looked like breath on a window. And one's got my name on it, she said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded slowly and set an envelope on the counter, sliding it toward her the way a person slides something they aren't sure is safe to touch. Nora looked down. Miss Eleanora Prescott. Her hand went still. She hadn't been Eleanora Prescott since she was 22 years old. She carried the letter upstairs without opening it. She set it on the kitchen table, and she made coffee she didn't drink, and she sat across from it the way a person sits across from someone they haven't seen in a long while and isn't certain they're ready to face. The handwriting was a man's. Careful, a little slanted, the kind of hand that had learned its letters from a mother with a switch nearby and had never quite unlearned the discipline of it. She knew the hand. She'd known it before she'd even turned the envelope over enough to see the postmark, before her eyes found the corner where a name was written small, almost shy, as if the writer hadn't been sure he had the right to put it there at all. W. Calloway. Miller's Bend, Wyoming Territory. Wyatt. The coffee went cold in the cup. 20 years is a long time to keep a door closed. Nora had gotten good at it. She'd built a life on the other side of that door, a husband, a home, 2 children now grown and gone to Denver and Sacramento, a store credit and a garden and a Sunday pew. She had not thought of Wyatt Calloway in. That was a lie, and she knew at the moment she thought it. She had thought of him plenty. Just quietly. The way you think of weather that already passed. She remembered the last time she'd seen him. 19 years old, standing at the rail yard with his hat in his hand same as Ben Carter's had been an hour ago, like something about bad news made men need to hold their hats. He'd told her he was riding out with a cattle outfit bound for the territory, that the pay was good, that he'd send for her within the year. He'd asked her to wait. She had waited. For 11 months. Then her father took sick, and the store needed running, and Thomas Hail, steady, kind, present, had asked her to marry him on a Tuesday in October, and she had said yes on a Wednesday, because Wyatt Calloway's letters had stopped coming in July, and a girl of 22 could only stand at a window so long before she stopped believing the road would bring anyone back. She'd told herself he changed his mind. She'd told herself, some nights, worse things than that. Now there was a letter on her table with a broken wax seal shape pressed into old paper, 20 years too late to matter, and her hands would not stop shaking as she finally reached for it. Eleonora. I don't rightly know when this'll reach you, if it reaches you at all. Mail slow out this way and slower still where I'm headed, but I promised I'd write, and a man ought to keep his word even when keeping it is hard. I know it's been longer than I said. I know I told you a year and it's been near 2 now. There's no excuse worth the ink it'd take to write it, so I won't waste your time with one. I'll only say this. I built the house. It sits on a rise above a creek that runs clear even in August, which the old-timers here say is rare enough to matter. 2 rooms, a good stove, glass in the windows, which cost me more than I care to admit. I built it with you in mind, Nora. Every board of it. I know I've no right to ask you to still be waiting. I know a year's a long stretch for a woman to hold a door open on a promise made by a fool who rode off before he was ready. But if some part of you still wants the life we talked about that night by the Prescott's fence, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere else. This is the last stop for me. I'll wait as long as it takes for this letter to find you, and however much longer past that you need. Yours, if you'll still have me. Wyatt. Nora read it twice before she let herself breathe properly. Then she read the postmark. October 12, 1869. Her hand went to her mouth. October. The same October Thomas had asked her to marry him. The same month, she did the arithmetic without wanting to, the same week, near enough, that she'd stood in the little church and said the vow that had shaped the rest of her life. He had been building a house. He had been waiting on a rise above a clear creek, with glass in the windows, while she stood in a dress her mother had sewn and promised herself to another man 1,200 miles away. The letter had been sitting in a train car in Cheyenne the whole time. 20 years of dust settling over a promise that had never actually broken, only gotten lost. She sat with that a long while. Long enough for the light through the kitchen window to shift from morning gold to the flatter white of noon. 20 years. 2 children raised. A husband buried. A whole life lived on the belief that Wyatt Calloway had simply stopped wanting her. He hadn't stopped. The letter had stopped. There was a difference, and it was the kind of difference that could take the floor out from under a woman who thought she'd made her peace with the past a long time ago. She didn't know she was crying until Sarah knocked on the door downstairs, calling up that she was closing the shop for the noon hour and did Nora want anything brought up. Nora wiped her face with the heel of her hand and folded the letter along its old crease, careful of the paper, soft as it was. Then she noticed something she hadn't before, something caught in the fold of the envelope, thin as a hair, that slid free and landed on the table when she picked the letter back up. A second scrap of paper. Smaller. Torn, not cut, from some other page entirely, the handwriting hurried in a way the letter above it had not been. She turned it over. For words, and nothing else. Still there. Still building. No date. No signature. Nora sat very still, staring at those 4 words, and for the first time in 20 years she found herself asking a question she had spent 2 decades not letting herself ask. Is he still alive? Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the tin sign, pushing dust down the empty road toward Wyoming. The wind didn't answer her question. Wind never does. Nora sat at that table until the light turned amber, until Sarah knocked twice more and finally left a plate of bread and butter outside the door without a word, because Sarah Beckett had known Nora Hail 11 years and had learned when a woman needed silence more than company. By evening, Nora had made a decision she hadn't fully admitted to herself yet. She just found her hands packing a bag. She told her son in Denver by telegram, 3 lines, no explanation beyond family matter, back within the month. And she told Sarah the truth, because Sarah had earned it. You're going to Wyoming, Sarah said. Not a question. I'm going to find out, Nora said. That's different from going to him. Sarah studied her a long moment, the way a woman studies another woman when she's deciding whether kindness or honesty serves better. She chose honesty. 20 years is a long time, Nora. He might be married. He might be dead. He might have moved on and be a stranger to you now, house or no house. I know. And if none of that's true? If he's still there? Still waiting, like that scrap of paper says? Nora closed her bag. Her hands had stopped shaking sometime in the night, and now they moved with a steadiness that surprised her. Then I'll have spent 20 years grieving something that never actually ended, she said. And I'd rather know. The train to Cheyenne took 4 days. From there, a stage line ran twice weekly toward a scatter of settlements along a creek called Willow Fork, and the man at the ticket window said the name Calloway like he was reaching for a memory just out of hand's reach. Calloway. Calloway, there's a fella runs cattle out past the fork. Keeps to himself. Built himself a spread up on the rise, must be near 20 years now. Never married that I heard of. Town folk used to gossip on it, good-looking man, decent land, no wife to show for it. Some said he was waitin' on somebody. Nora's throat went tight. Is he still there? Far as I know. Don't come to town much. Sends his hand in for supplies. She bought her stage ticket with a hand that trembled only a little. The stage let her off at a crossroads store 2 miles from where the driver said the Calloway place sat, because the road up to it wasn't fit for the coach. She stood in the dust with her single bag and looked at a dirt track winding up through cottonwoods toward a rise she couldn't yet see the top of, and she understood, standing there, that she had come further than 4 days of railroad track. She had come 20 years, and the last 2 miles were going to be the longest of them. A boy of maybe 14 loading feed sacks outside the store watched her for a while before he spoke. You lookin' for somebody, ma'am? Wyatt Calloway. Something crossed the boy's face, not surprise exactly, more like recognition of a name that carried weight in this place, the way certain names do in small towns. That's a fair walk. I could run you up in the wagon, if you don't mind waitin' on my pa to finish his business inside. She minded very much. She'd waited 20 years already. I'll walk, she said. Thank you kindly. The road climbed slow and easy through stands of cottonwood turning gold with the season, and somewhere below it a creek ran, clear as the letter had promised, catching the afternoon light in long silver ribbons. Nora walked with her bag in one hand and her heart doing something she hadn't felt it do in longer than she cared to admit, not since she was 22 and waiting at a rail yard for a boy who hadn't yet learned to be a man. She crested the rise a little past 4 o'clock, breath short from the climb, and stopped. The house sat exactly as the letter described it. 2 rooms, good stone chimney, glass catching the sun in both windows. 20 years had weathered the boards to a soft silver gray, and someone had built a porch onto the front since the letter was written, a later addition, she guessed, added the way a man adds things to a house he expects to keep living in. There was a rocking chair on that porch. Just the one. Nora's chest tightened at that single chair in a way she hadn't expected. 20 years of solitude sat in that chair as plain as if someone had written it on a sign. A dog barked from somewhere behind the house, an old, graveled bark, the kind that belongs to an animal that's earned the right to be lazy about it, and then a man came around the corner of the barn with a coil of rope over his shoulder, moving with the unhurried economy of someone who has done the same chores in the same order for 2 decades and found peace in the repetition. He was gray at the temples. His shoulders had thickened the way a working man's do with age, and there was a stiffness in how he favored his left leg that spoke of some old injury never quite healed right. But she knew him. She would have known him across a crowded rail yard, across 100 strangers, across all 20 years standing between the boy who'd left and the man who stood now frozen at the sight of a woman on his road with a bag in her hand and the afternoon sun behind her. He didn't move. Didn't speak. The rope slid off his shoulder and hit the dirt, and he didn't seem to notice. Nora. Her name came out of him like something he hadn't let himself say in a very long time, careful and disbelieving, the way a man might say the name of somebody he'd buried. She found she couldn't answer right away. 20 years of words crowded up in her throat all at once and none of them would come first. I got your letter, she finally managed. 3 days ago. It took 20 years to find me. Something moved across his face then, understanding, and beneath it, a grief so old and so deep it had worn smooth like river stone. He crossed the yard slow, like a man approaching something he was afraid might not be real, might dissolve like morning mist if he moved too fast. 20 years, he repeated, quiet. I thought, he stopped. Shook his head. I thought you got it and chose different. I thought that was my answer, all this time. Silence. There was no answer, Nora said. There was no letter. Not until Tuesday. He stood close enough now that she could see the lines time had carved beside his eyes, could see they were the same gray-blue they'd always been, could see the boy still living somewhere underneath the man he'd become. I married, she said, because it had to be said, because there was no kindness in delaying it. Thomas Hale. Good man. He's 3 years gone now. We had 2 children. Wyatt absorbed that the way a man absorbs a blow he'd long expected but never stopped dreading. His jaw tightened. He looked past her, toward the road she'd walked up, and for a moment she thought he might simply turn and walk into the barn and not come out, the way some men handle grief, alone, behind closed doors, where nobody has to watch it happen. But he didn't. I'm glad, he said, and it cost him plainly to say it, that you had a good man. That you weren't left standing at a window your whole life on account of me. I was, she said softly. For 11 months, I was exactly that. And I told myself after that you'd simply stopped wanting me. I built 20 years on that belief, Wyatt. I need you to understand what it did to me, thinking that. He nodded slowly, and something in his throat worked before he spoke again. I built this house thinking you'd walk up that road any day for near 2 years. Then I told myself the same story you told yourself, that you'd stopped wanting me, that you'd found somebody with better sense than to leave a girl waiting on a promise from Wyoming territory. I kept building anyway. Couldn't seem to stop. Every board I nailed, I told myself it didn't matter anymore, and every board I nailed anyway like it did. They stood there a moment, 2 people who had spent 2 decades grieving the same misunderstanding from opposite ends of a country, and the only sound was the creak below the rise and the old dog's tail thumping once against the porch boards, as if even the animal understood something significant was happening and didn't want to interrupt it. I have children, Nora said. A life in Miller's Bend. A store, a house, a church pew that's mine on Sundays. I know. I didn't come here thinking, she stopped, because she wasn't certain what she'd been thinking, walking 2 miles up a dirt road with her heart in her throat. I came because I needed to know if you were still here. If the letter was true. I hadn't thought past that. Wyatt looked at her a long moment, and something in his weathered face softened into an expression she remembered from 20 years ago, patient, unhurried, the look of a man willing to wait as long as a thing took to be right. Then don't think past it tonight, he said. There's a spare room made up. Has been for longer than I'd admit to a stranger. Stay. Rest. We've got 20 years of catching up, and I expect neither one of us is fool enough to try and settle all of it before supper. She almost said yes right then. But before she could answer, the old dog rose from the porch with a low growl in its chest, ears pinned toward the tree line at the edge of the yard, and Wyatt's hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning by the barn door, a motion too practiced, too immediate, for a man who claimed to live quiet and alone. Wyatt, Nora said, watching his face change, watching 2 decades of careful peace go tight and wary in an instant. What is it? He didn't answer. He was already moving toward the tree line, rifle in hand, and it was only then that Nora saw what the dog had seen first, a rider sitting motionless in the shadow of the cottonwoods, watching the house, watching them, and making no move at all to come closer or ride away. The rider didn't move. For a long moment, nothing on that rise moved at all, not the dog, frozen mid-growl with its hackles raised, not Wyatt with the rifle held low but ready, not the horse in the shadows, its rider's hat pulled low enough that his face stayed hidden in the failing light. Then he lifted a hand, slow and open, the universal sign of a man who wanted it known he carried no quarrel today. That you, Vance? Wyatt called out, voice carrying flat across the yard. It's me. The rider walked his horse forward into the last of the sun, and Nora saw a man perhaps Wyatt's age, well dressed for open country, a silver watch chain catching the light against a dark wool vest. He had the look of a man who'd never once in his life split his own firewood. Didn't mean to spook the dog. Was passing and saw smoke from your chimney. You weren't passing, Wyatt said. There's nothing past my fence line but the fork and 40 miles of nothing. Vance smiled, and it didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Fair enough. I came to ask you again. Railroads laying the spur line through the valley next spring, Calloway. Your creek frontage sits square in the survey. I can still get you a fair price if you sell before they run the line through and take it by right instead. I told you in August. I told you in June before that. This is my land. Built with my hands. It's not for sale. Man can change his mind. Vance's gaze slid past Wyatt, settling on Nora with an unhurried curiosity that made her spine straighten. Didn't know you had company. She's no business of yours. Everything out here is my business, Calloway, one way or another. Vance touched his hat brim, unbothered, the way men are unbothered when they hold every advantage and know it. Think on the offer. Railroad doesn't wait on sentiment. Neither do I, past a certain point. He turned his horse without waiting for a reply and rode back into the cottonwoods, the sound of hooves fading slow into the coming dark. Wyatt didn't lower the rifle until the sound was gone entirely. He told her the rest of it over supper, in the plain, unadorned way of a man who decided a long time ago that self-pity served no purpose out here. Vance had come through the valley 3 years back, buying up land cheap from ranchers who didn't know a railroad survey team had already walked their creek beds. Most had sold. A few hadn't, and one of those few had ended up with a broken leg after his barn caught fire under circumstances nobody could prove and everybody understood. That how you got the limp? Nora asked quietly. Fell off a roof mending shingles the week after my neighbor's barn burned, Wyatt said, and the careful flatness in his voice told her everything the words themselves didn't. Coincidence, most likely. Wyatt. I've got no proof of anything, Nora. Just the sense a man gets when someone wants something bad enough to wait him out. He set down his fork. I should have sold 2 years ago when the offer was still generous. Pride kept me here. Pride, and, he stopped himself. And what? He looked at her across the small table, firelight moving warm along the line of his jaw, and she saw the boy again, the one who'd stood at the rail yard with a promise in his mouth. And the house I built for you, he said. Couldn't sell a thing I built with your name in every board of it. Even after I stopped believing you'd ever see it. The fire popped. Outside, the wind had died down to nothing, and the creek ran on below the rise, indifferent to everything above it. She stayed 3 days. She told herself, the first morning, that she'd leave by noon, that she'd seen what she came to see, that the letter had been answered, that her life sat waiting for her back in Miller's Bend with its store and its church pew and its familiar rhythms. She told herself the same thing the second morning, and again the third, and each time she found some reason the leaving could wait another day. Mending a fence needed 2 sets of hands. The bread needed watching. Wyatt's old dog had taken to following her from room to room like something in him recognized what neither of them had yet said aloud. On the third evening, she found Wyatt on the porch in the single rocking chair, not rocking, just sitting with his forearms on his knees, looking down the dark road the way a man looks at a road he spent 20 years watching. Vance'll be back, he said, without turning. Not with words next time, I expect. Then don't face it alone. The words came out of her before she'd fully decided to say them, and once spoken, she found she meant them entirely. I've a store in Miller's Bend I could sell. Grown children who don't need their mother minding a counter anymore. I came out here to answer a question, Wyatt, and I've had my answer 3 days now. I'm still here because I don't want to leave. He turned to look at her then, and whatever careful distance he'd been keeping since Vance rode off broke quietly apart. I've got a fight coming, he said. Might lose this land yet. Might lose more than that. I already lost 20 years to a letter that got stuck in a train car, Nora said. I'm not much interested in losing anything else to caution. Whatever's coming, I'd rather stand here and face it than go back to Miller's Bend and spend the rest of my life wondering. Vance came again 8 days later, and this time he brought 2 men and no pretense of pleasantry, and he brought papers, a survey claim, a filing with the Territorial Land Office, an argument about a boundary marker moved 40 years back that Wyatt swore had never sat where Vance's documents now placed it. It might have gone the way Vance intended. Men like Vance rarely lost these fights, they simply outlasted the people who tried to stand against them. But Nora had grown up the daughter of a man who'd fought a railroad company once himself, over water rights on the Prescott land, and she remembered things her father had taught her about filing claims and contesting surveys and the particular slowness of territorial courts that could be turned, with patience, into a weapon of its own. She wrote letters. She rode into town and sent telegrams to a lawyer her father had once retained in Cheyenne. She sat at Wyatt's kitchen table late into the evenings with maps spread between them, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt entirely, fiercely useful. It took the better part of a month. The claim was eventually thrown out for lack of proper filing, a technicality, the lawyer said, but a technicality was all they'd needed. Vance did not come again after that. Word reached them later, second-hand through the boy at the crossroads store, that he'd moved his interests to a valley 2 counties over, where the ranchers were fewer and the fights, presumably, easier won. Wyatt stood in his own yard the evening the news came, looking at land that was finally, fully, uncontested his, and Nora watched something in his shoulders loosen that had likely been carrying weight for 3 long years. "Feels strange," he said, "not watching that road for him anymore." "Watch it for something else, then," Nora said. He looked at her, and understood. They married in the spring, in the same crossroads store where a 14-year-old boy had once offered her a ride she'd been too proud to take. Sarah Beckett came out from Miller's Bend for it, and cried through the whole short ceremony, and told everyone within earshot that she'd known it the moment Nora walked out that door with her bag packed, though she hadn't known any such thing and everybody there knew it. Nora sold the store. Her son came out from Denver that first summer and stood on the rise looking down at the creek and said, quiet, that he understood now why his mother had gone quiet and strange for a week after a mail sack full of 20-year-old letters turned up in Wyoming. The second rocking chair arrived on the porch before the wedding did. Autumn came again, a full year after the letter had finally found her, and it found the rise above Willow Fork much as it always had, cottonwoods turning gold, the creek running clear and cold beneath a sky gone the deep blue particular to high country in October. But the porch held 2 chairs now instead of 1, and both of them moved gently in the evening wind, though nobody sat in either at that hour. Near the porch steps, where a man's hat might rest after a long day's work, a battered gray Stetson sat overturned in the grass, and beside it, someone had gathered a small, careless bundle of wildflowers, the kind that grow wild and unbothered along a creek that runs clear even when nobody's watching. The wind moved through the yard, unhurried, the way it moves through places that have finally stopped waiting for anything.